Okay, guys, welcome. And this is nutrition, fundamentals of nutrition. And tonight we're going to be going over carbohydrates, which everybody thinks is a dirty word, but it's not, because you need carbohydrates. You just need the good ones, not the bad ones. So let me start this as a slideshow. There we go. Okay. All right. So what are the learning objectives? And I always go over this. We're going to be able to identify monosaccharides, mono meaning one, disaccharides meaning two, polysaccharides meaning many, that are common in nutrition, and list what food sources they come from. We're going to summarize what carbohydrate digestion and absorption looks like, how it happens. How do hormones control blood glucose concentrations? We're going to talk about how added sugars can contribute to health problems, and how alternative sweeteners can help to limit calories and sugar intake. Identify health benefits of and recommendations for starches and fibers. And we're going to talk about the glycemic index and explain why its use in disease prevention is controversial. And the glycemic index is definitely a source of contention for a lot of people, but it really does. Your body needs carbohydrates. The preferred energy source for your body's function are carbs. So again, like I mentioned last week, in each and every one of your cells, you have a mitochondria, and the mitochondria makes energy. It makes adenosine triphosphate, and that's energy. Well, it's got to eat to make energy. And so it likes to eat carbohydrates. So that is the primary source for just basic metabolism for your cells to be able to function. And the brain depends exclusively on carbs, right? But the good carbs, not donuts, okay? Carbohydrate-rich foods are recommended for good health. So see, the keto diet, bad. Grains, vegetables, legumes, fruits, and milk all have plenty of carbs in them, okay? So dietary carbohydrates are sugars, starches, and fiber. So when we look at sugars, you have monosaccharides, which are single sugars, and disaccharides, which are double sugars. And then for starches and fibers, you have polysaccharides, which they're chains, multiple monosaccharides. So a bunch of single sugars that are all kind of linked together. And of all the monosaccharides, glucose is a very important one. And the cells rely on glucose for fuel, right? And the brain and nervous system really almost exclusively. So in order for your brain and nervous system to function at their optimum, you need glucose. You get it from carbohydrates, and your body will maintain glucose blood levels within limits that allow for cell nourishment. So in other words, back to digestion, your pancreas is an endocrine and exocrine gland. The endocrine part of it is that it makes insulin. And a good way to think about insulin is an Uber driver that drives through your bloodstream and picks up sugar in your blood, puts it in the car, and drives it and sends it to all your cells so they have nourishment. And then if there's anything left, any sugar left, brings it to the liver and it stores it in case you need it for later. And that's an important concept to understand, especially when we start talking about disease processes like diabetes mellitus. Other monosaccharides are fructose, and it sounds like fruit. It's very, very sweet, right? And it occurs naturally in fruits, honey, and even parts of regular white table sugar. It's the most common next to glucose, right? Then you have galactose, and that's the one, listen, lactose is right in the name. Primarily, it's part of milk. It's the sugar that's in milk. And it's separated or freed from lactose while you're digesting it, right? So if you're drinking milk, the galactose actually is separated from the lactose, and that gets absorbed separately. Then disaccharides, which are pairs of single sugars that are linked together, sucrose, lactose, and maltose. They all have glucose as one of their single sugars, and they're combined with a second one. Sucrose, just think white sugar, right? Enzymes break it down into glucose and fructose components, okay? That's the worst one for you, right? Plain old white sugar. Ever see a kid on Halloween? They eat all that candy, and it's just straight up sugar. They run around like lunatics, and then in about an hour, they're just passed out. So that's sucrose. Quick in, quick out. Spikes the blood sugar, and then it, zoop, gone. Other disaccharides, lactose is glucose and galactose, and that's the primary carb that's in milk. And then maltose is from plants. It's the sugar that's in plants. And it's got 2 glucose units in it, and it's produced when starches break down during digestion. And lactose intolerance, I will talk about that for a second. For people that really are lactose intolerant, understand that's not something that just, happens one morning. You wake up and go, oh, I can't take lactose. Just like celiac disease, it's something that you usually have from the time you're a child, right? Babies are sometimes lactose intolerant. And when they do take in lactose, they will get diarrhea, abdominal cramping, and that kind of thing. Okay. So here's a nice table, kind of gives you the chemist's view. I was never a big lover of chemistry, but it's there for your taking. And it goes through the monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then the disaccharides, which are them combined with glucose, right? Pretty easy to understand. And then your polysaccharides, they're mostly glucose. In some cases, there's some other monosaccharides in there, but mostly glucose. And they consist of starch, glycogen, and certain fibers, right? So major polysaccharides in nutrition are glycogen. Remember earlier, I talked about insulin being the Uber driver, and it feeds the carbs to your cells, and then it takes whatever sugar's left and brings it to the liver. Well, it gets stored in the liver as glycogen. And then at some point later on, maybe you're working a 12-hour shift, maybe you didn't eat anything, your blood sugar starts to dip a little low. Your liver can do this little magic trick called hepatogluconeogenesis. It can take the glycogen and turn it into glucagon, and actually can put it back into your bloodstream so that you don't get dizzy and tired. Starches, they come from plants, and then fibers are actually the structural part of plants. And fiber is found in pretty much all plant-derived foods. Fiber's a little bit different, and we'll talk more about fiber. So here are the chains, right? Glycogen molecule, hundreds of glucose units, and they're just branched all over the place. Starch molecule, the same thing. They can be branched or unbranched, but you're not expected to know that, so don't worry about it. So within the polysaccharides, we'll talk about fiber. So fiber consists of polysaccharides. Digestive enzymes can't break the bonds. So when you eat fiber, right, what it does is it moves through your digestive tract intact. It doesn't get broken down. And so the whole idea of that, fiber helps you go number 2, right? And so the whole idea is that as the fiber is passing through the digestive tract, the insoluble fiber doesn't dissolve at all. It just kind of hangs on to water, and it helps you have an easier bowel movement. And then there are some soluble fibers that can dissolve in water, and they can get broken down by bacteria that are in your large intestine. And remember, we all have, a ton, about 5 to 10 pounds of our body weight is bacteria in our gut, right? So the goal of digestion and absorption of sugars and starches is for the body to break them down into small molecules, glucose, single, right? A monosaccharide. We need to break them all down into glucose so that the cells can eat and make energy. That's the whole idea, okay? And here we talk about carbohydrate digestion and absorption and the different ways that, we can break them down. So for sugars and starches, the mouth and the salivary glands secrete saliva, moisten the food up. And believe it or not, the enzymes that are in your spit, in your saliva, can actually begin the digestive process, right? And so the amylase, which is the enzyme, can break the starch down into smaller polysaccharides like maltose. Fiber in the mouth, all you're doing is kind of crushing and tearing it up and mixing it with saliva just to moisten it so you can swallow it, but it doesn't break it down, okay? Sugar and starches in the stomach, well, your stomach has hydrochloric acid in it. So the acid can inactivate the salivary enzymes, which stops the digestive process. So it's really strong acid that's in your stomach. So it stops that amylase from breaking anything down with the sugars and the starches, because it's going to get broken down more later on down in its travels, okay? Fiber in the stomach doesn't get digested, but what it does do, it delays gastric emptying. So in other words, when you eat fiber, when it gets to your stomach, it actually sits there for a little bit. and it prevents the stomach from actually allowing the food to go through the pyloric sphincter and into the small intestine. It just keeps it there for a little bit. Then with sugars and starches, you have the small intestine. And remember the small intestine, DJ, ileum, duodenum, jejunum, ileum. They're the three parts of your small intestines. And your pancreas, which is an exocrine organ as well. Pancreas makes amylase. It releases it through a duct into the small intestine, and pancreatic amylase breaks starches down into small polysaccharides like maltose. Again, fiber in the small intestine just passes through, doesn't get digested, okay? So sugars and starches, when the disaccarides enzymes on the surface of intestinal cells hydrolyze, they change the disaccharides into monosaccharides. So this is where your small intestine is really where all absorption takes place, right? So that's where any nutrients that you need from the food that you have eaten get absorbed in your small intestine. So there's little cells in there that actually break the disaccharides into monosaccharides, right? So maltose, broken down glucose and glucose, sucrose, fructose and glucose, lactose, galactose, and glucose. But then fiber in the large intestine, here's where it does its trick, okay? Some of the soluble fibers can get digested, right? And they actually produce these short chain fatty acids, amino acids, that are absorbed by the large intestine. But the insoluble fiber just hangs on to water, and keeps the stool soft. That's why fiber helps you poop. Okay. Now, how does our body regulate our blood sugar or blood glucose? So blood glucose homeostasis is regulated by insulin and glucagon. Remember, insulin is the Uber driver. So your body knows when you eat, a donut and it gets through your mouth, down your esophagus, through the lower esophageal sphincter into your stomach, then stomach breaks it down into chyme, like a mush, and then it passes through the pyloric sphincter into your small intestine. Well, the sugars, the glucose, gets absorbed through the small intestine and into your bloodstream. And that tells the pancreas, if it's working right, hey, we need insulin. And so the pancreas will then release insulin, and the insulin Uber driver will get that sugar and feed your cells. And also insulin stimulates glycogen synthesis in the liver. So in other words, if you don't have enough sugar, then the insulin will go to the liver and say, hey, didn't I give you some to hang on to? I need it back. Let's go. And then glucagon, which is the other hormone that the pancreas makes, breaks down glycogen into smaller glucose molecules if the blood sugar's too low. So it gives you a little bit of a boost so that you don't get a headache or get dizzy when your sugar is low. Maybe you haven't eaten in a while, which is never healthy. Sugars, what are the health effects of sugars? I don't think I need to tell you this, but we have a huge obesity problem in this country. And people say, I don't really eat more. If you sat and kept a log of everything that you put into your mouth during the day, the whole day, you'd be surprised at what you really eat. And higher obesity rates are directly connected with increased consumption of added sugars, things like soda, right? Especially soda. Sodas are a big problem. Moderate amounts of sugar usually don't cause obesity. Remember, and with calories, you should be expending energy more than the amount of calories you're taking in, or at least equal to. If you're taking in more calories than you're using, well, it's going to be stored and turned to fat, and it causes obesity. And then when it comes to heart disease, fructose, believe it or not, because we all think, oh, fruit's healthy. Yeah, in small quantities. But a lot of it can lead to an unhealthy buildup of lipids in your coronary arteries and inside your heart, which can cause a myocardial infarction or a heart attack. Okay. I'm going to pause for 1 second. All righty. So we talked about what the health effects are, and they're not good of sugar, right? Okay. Health effects of sugars and alternative sweeteners. Give me 1 second, please. Them in. Okay. So, for dietary recommendations, there's not a tolerable upper intake level. So in other words, we really can't tell you how much is too much. But the bottom line is that most people in this country need to limit the intake of added sugars. So the dietary guidelines for Americans says that limiting your intake to about less than 10% of your total calories for the day. The World Health Organization, who I like better, says greater benefits when you limit it to 5% of your day's total calories. So if you take in, let's say, 2,000 calories a day, 200 would be 10%, 100 would be 5%. So calories from just plain old sugar, okay? And then how to reduce, sugar, added sugar. Don't use table sugar. It says here use less, but don't use table sugar. And use those calories to sweeten something that's going to give you a bang for your buck. In other words, a nutrient-dense food like oatmeal, instead of, candy and soda and that kind of thing. And instead of drinking, calorie-rich sodas and sports drinks and energy drinks and fruit drinks, with water, you should be drinking water, fat-free milk, fruit juice, or unsweetened tea or coffee. And replace sugars with other spices like cinnamon or nutmeg or allspice or cloves. If your choice is to have fruit or a cake for dessert, pick the fruit, right? If you do have the cake or cookies or ice cream or whatever, just try to have a very small portion. And warm up sweet foods before you serve them if you can, because the heating makes them taste even sweeter to you. And always read labels, right? So people think, well, I don't use white sugar, but I use other things. Well, take a look at this. 1 teaspoon of white sugar is the same as 1 teaspoon of brown sugar, candy, jelly, corn sweetener, pancake syrup, honey, or molasses. 1 tablespoon of ketchup. Do you ever think ketchup had sugar in it? It does. That's what cuts the acidity because it's made from tomatoes. And then 1 1/2 ounces of soft drink. Most soft drinks, can is 12 ounces. Bottles can be 16 ounces. 1 1/2 ounces is a teaspoon of sugar. So you're looking at a lot of sugar, okay? A lot of sugar. And then this, you can read this later, but this goes through the different types of added sugar. So when you're reading a label, it might say dextrose, anhydrous dextrose, high fructose corn syrup, honey, confectioner's sugar, whatever, turbinado sugar. There are lots of different names for things that are still a form of sugar, but, sometimes people get fooled and they're like, well, it doesn't have sugar in it. Yes, it does. So you have to learn to read labels. And then this is a little table that goes through sample nutrients in sugars and other foods. So the portion that's indicated here gives you about 100 calories, right? So notice for a similar number of calories and grams of carbs, milk, legumes, fruits, grains, vegetables offer more nutrients than the sugars do. So 1 cup of milk, for example, right? And that's 1%, which is low-fat milk. 1 cup of milk is about 100 calories. 12 carbs, 12 grams of carbs, 8 grams of protein, 300 milligrams of calcium, 1/10 of a gram of iron, vitamin A, 144, and vitamin C, 2 micrograms, right? Kidney beans, a 1/2 cup of kidney beans is 100 calories, 20 carbs, but, calcium, protein, etc. So if you look, things like wheat bread, but then you look down here at cola, like Coca-Cola. So 1 cup of Coke, about 100 calories, 26 carbs, and of course that's in our way, but no nutrients. There's no vitamin C, no vitamin A, no iron, no calcium, no protein in Coke, in case you thought otherwise, right? So that's important to remember. And then we have sweeteners, right? Things that aren't really sugar, but be careful, because when you get a package and it says no added sugar, or, it's not no sugar used, read the label, because they could be using sugar alcohols, right? So sugar alcohols are a type of sweetener, right? They're carbs. They give you less energy than sucrose. Yeah, they're natural. You find them in fruits and vegetables, and they make things sweet, If something tastes sweet, something had to make it taste sweet, right? But it's got some side effects. Gas, which is always fun, abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, but on the good side, does not contribute to dental caries, which are cavities, right? But make sure you read labels. And then you have non-nutritive sweeteners, right? So things like, Splenda and Sweet and Low, those kinds of things, right? So they're not carbs. You don't get any energy from them. They will make the food or the drink sweet without promoting any tooth decay, but we don't really know what kind of an impact they have on weight loss or your health in general. So, if you see somebody go to McDonald's and they order, a Big Mac, a large fry, large Diet Coke, I always have to wonder, like, why? So, and then aspartame, which is one of the non-nutritive sweeteners, has phenylalanine, which if people have PKU, which is phenylketonuria, they can die. So that's important to know. So you must always read labels. And then here are the approved non-nutritive sweeteners that are out on the market. When I was a kid, what we had was saccharin. And saccharin came in a bottle that looked like a bottle of aspirin. True story. They were little itty bitty white pills. And you would take a little white pill and pop it into your cup of coffee, and it was sweet, right? But they think it causes cancer. So, oops. But then there are other sweeteners too, So aspartame is the one that we just talked about. That's an approved sweetener, but if you have PKU, you better not be using it, right? I don't expect you guys to know this stuff off the top of your head, okay? As far as the names of the different non-nutritive sweeteners. Let's see, let's move past that chart. So recommendations, you should be eating generous servings of starch and fiber-rich carbs, the good carbs, whole grains, vegetables, legumes, fruit. And doing that helps reduce the risk of obesity, which then reduces your risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, tooth decay, GI disorders, and malnutrition, right? For heart disease, to prevent heart disease, Mediterranean diet consists of whole grains, legumes, and vegetables, and fish. And those people, my people, over in Italy live to be well over 100. And then the soluble fibers like bran, barley, and legumes, they actually grab cholesterol and get rid of it for you. They hang on to the cholesterol, so they lower your cholesterol, which is awesome. Diabetes. There's two types, like I'd said last week. Type 2 diabetes, you can give it to yourself by having a sedentary lifestyle and just overeating, being overweight and eating all the wrong foods. So fiber helps to delay the passage of nutrients from the stomach. So in other words, it holds it in the stomach for a minute. So it slows the glucose absorption, which lets your blood absorb the glucose in little increments at a time, right? Which is better than, boom, a whole blob of glucose. There you go, have some sugar, bam. Like the example I gave you with the kids with the Halloween kit. And then the glycemic response, that talks about how quickly the glucose gets absorbed after you eat, right? So what you want is slow and steady. Slow and steady wins the race. You want slow absorption with a modest rise and a steady decline. You want it nice, slow, and steady. You don't want a spike up, but a spike down. You don't want that because that's how diabetes occurs. For GI health, soluble and insoluble fibers, they help you go potty, and they really do protect against diverticular disease. And when we get into more diseases later on, you'll hear about that. And cancer. Dietary fiber protects against colon cancer. Nobody wants colon cancer. Weight management. Fiber-rich foods are low in fats and added sugars, which means less energy per bite, but they make you feel full because they absorb water, right? And we know that Americans, nobody else in the world has an all-you-can-eat buffet. We like big portions. And high fiber foods are better than commercial fiber preparations. So in other words, your body wants what it needs from food. It doesn't want it from a pill or a supplement. Okay, it's not readily absorbed the way it is from foods that you eat. And that is important to remember. Carbohydrates, disease prevention recommendations. What are harmful effects? So, Americans, If a little's good, well, more must be better. No, it's not true. If you take in too much fiber, it can actually bind with minerals the fiber can actually pull minerals that you need into your excrement, right? And people that have a marginal food intake are not necessarily going to meet their energy or nutrient needs if they eat a lot of fiber. In other words, if you're just in general not eating very much and you're taking in mostly fiber with what you are eating, then you're going to have problems with energy levels and types of anemia, et cetera. Malnourished, the elderly, and the little kids should not be on vegan diets. They are especially vulnerable. And believe it or not, you can get dehydrated with excessive fiber. Remember how I said fiber, the insoluble fiber will hang on to water? Well, if you're eating too much of it, it will start to pull too much water and it can dehydrate. Okay. So here's the health effects of different starches and dietary fibers. So people who eat things like barley, oats, oat bran, rye, fruits like apples and citrus fruits, blah, blah, blah. They get viscous soluble types of fiber, right? And they're listed there like gums, pectin, psyllium, and some hemicellulose. What do? They lower your cholesterol, right? They slow down the absorption of glucose. They slow the transit of food through the upper GI tract. They hold moisture in, making your stool softer. And they can actually yield small fat molecules that the colon can use for energy that make you feel fuller. So take a look at this chart later on, but obviously, there are definite benefits to eating starches and dietary fibers. Okay, what are the recommendations? Well, so they say about half of your daily energy requirement should be carbs, 45 to 65%. That's a nice broad, right? Fibers should be whole grains, vegetables, fruits, and legumes, about 20 to 35 grams in a day. And, some people, you can substitute plant sources of proteins for some animal sources. The bottom line is that when it comes to protein, animal sources and products of animals like eggs are the best and carry the most amount of protein. But things like soybeans, right? Soybeans are actually considered a total protein. And that's people that are vegan will typically eat soybeans in the form of tofu, right? And that's got a good amount of protein in it to make up for what they're lacking because they're not eating meat. Grains, so foods from this group are giving you about 15 grams of carbs, mostly starch. You want to limit refined grains. So in other words, like for example, white bread, processed. Stay away from white bread. If it's white, it's not right. You should stick with like wheat bread or rye bread, right? Vegetables. Now, some vegetables are major sources of starches. They can give you 15 grams of carbs. So there are starchy and then non-starchy vegetables, but they all have some carbs in them. Broccoli, cauliflower, et cetera, et cetera. Fruits, about a half a cup serving gives you about 15 grams of carbs, but then the sugar concentration can vary. So for example, watermelon is mostly water, right? Not a whole lot of sugar. Even the sweet watermelon, not a whole lot of sugar. Strawberries, blueberries, lots of sugar, right? Very sweet, not much water. And no more than half of your day's fruit should be from juice, should be from fruit, okay? And then milk or milk products like yogurt, right? They give you about 12 grams of carbs. And foods that are proteins, really, most of them don't have carbs except nuts and dried beans. They do have some carbs. So a half a cup of dried beans will give you about 15 grams of carbohydrates. Read the labels, read the labels, read the labels, read the labels. Can't say that enough, right? Read the labels because you want to know what is in what you're eating and what percentage of the daily recommended serving are you getting in this particular food, okay? FDA authorized health claims, okay? Fiber containing products, fruits and vegetables can reduce your cancer risk. Fruits and vegetables and grains can reduce coronary artery disease. Soluble fiber from oats and psyllium can reduce heart disease risk, and whole grains reduce heart disease risk and certain types of cancers. So it's definitely healthy. So now let's talk about the glycemic index, right? The glycemic index, excuse me, measures how quickly the carbohydrates in the food that you eat get absorbed. And so Factors that influence it are, what kind of a carb is it? What's the starch structure, the fiber content? So let me just give you an example. If you eat a donut, okay, that is going to have a high glycemic index, right? Because it's going to go in quick and come out quick. Versus if you get starches from like multi-grain bread, that's going to keep your blood sugars a little more stable, right? Goes in slowly, absorbed slowly, excreted slowly. And that's what you want. That is the key to life and good health too. Small, frequent meals that, with the glycemic index that are low on the glycemic index. And research indicates that a low glycemic index diet may decrease risk for some chronic diseases. It's not confirmed yet. There have been a lot of studies done about this. But the bottom line is keeping your blood sugars stable can't ever be a bad thing, right? It's a good thing. And there's the glycemic index. So foods that are digested slowly are on the low end. Foods that cause a gradual and more moderate response, they're the ones that you want. So when you look at this chart, just look at the difference. The high glycemic index food, that's your donut or your piece of cake or ice cream, right? They basically look at that blood sugar spike and then down. Whereas a low glycemic index kind of little more slowly absorbed and doesn't really bottom out like the sugars do here, kind of keeps stable for a while. Very important, especially for diabetics. And that is the end of the show. So let me stop the recording.